In this video, we are going to analyze a more complex code sample based on the lessons that we've learned previously. As you can see here, we have 16 lines of code, and there are certainly a lot of conditional stuff going on here. We have ifs and elses and end statements all over the place. And sometimes it's useful to simply take a quick bird's eye view and just check out the lay of the land before we analyze each line one at a time. As you can see, we have an outer conditional statement beginning on line 2. It continues on line 9 with an else keyword and then closes up on line 16 with the end. How do I know that that is the outer conditional? Because as you can see, that if, that else, and that end are all aligned all the way to the left. So that is the outer conditional statement. Now within this conditional, we have an inner conditional that takes place on line 4 and has an else on line 6 and an end on line 8. And within the else clause of the outer conditional, we have yet another inner conditional beginning on line 11 with an else keyword on line 13 and an end statement on line 15. So we have an outer conditional with two inner conditionals within it. Now let's use the Peter-Jang notation to determine and predict what exactly will happen when we run this code. So on line 1, we create a variable called elemento and set it to the value of 66. So that is the first line of code that gets run. The second line of code that gets run is line 2, where we begin the outer conditional statement. This if statement says, if elemento is less than 50. Now, is elemento less than 50? It is not, because it is 66. So that means we skip all the way until the else keyword on line 9, simply skipping over lines 3 through 8 entirely. We honestly don't even need to read the contents of that code, since Ruby will not end up reading the contents of that code. Ruby is simply going to skip over it. So let's head down to line 9, which is going to be the third line of code to get run. Else, meaning if elemento is not less than 50, and that is our case because it is not less than 50, then run the code from lines 10 through 15. So we will go ahead and do that. So the next line of code to get run is line 10, which will print the number 4 to the terminal. This is the fourth line of code that gets run. This is actually the first time we'll be printing anything to the terminal. Line 11 is the next line of code to get run, the fifth line of code to get run. And we begin an inner conditional statement here, which says, if elemento is 66, and that actually is the case, because on line 1 we set elemento to be 66, then run the lines of code between this if statement and the else statement on line 13. So let's run line 12, that is the sixth line of code to get run, and that will print the number 5 to the terminal. Else is the next line of code to get run. However, the else clause does not get triggered because we already went down the first path of this inner conditional, right? If elemento is 66, it was, so we triggered that path. At this point, we're going to skip over the contents of this else clause. So we will skip to the end statement closing out this inner conditional. So line 15 is then the eighth line of code to get run. And then finally, we close out the outer conditional with the end statement on line 16. So based on all of this, we can predict that when we run this code, we will see the numbers 4 and 5 in the terminal, right? Because we print line 4 on line 10, and we print the number 5 on line 12. So that is what we should see. And indeed, it is.